Okay, so I'm walking down Avenida Revolución and I hear drums, and then I look up and I see this. Feathers this tall, rattles going on every single step, coming right up the middle of the most touristy street in Tijuana. And here's the part that gets me. Today is August 22nd. That's World Folklore Day. I did not plan that, I just walked into it. Now, first reaction from basically everybody on this sidewalk, including two guys standing right next to me, is Aztec. And I get it. But that's not really what you're looking at. What you're looking at is called Danza Chichimeca, or Danza Conchera, or Danza Azteca, depending on who you ask and which group is dancing. And those names are not interchangeable. I'll come back to that because that's actually the most interesting part of this whole thing. First, where does this come from? Not from here. This tradition comes from central Mexico, Querétaro especially, and the Bajío region around Guanajuato. That's hundreds of miles southeast of this street. Mexico's National Institute of Indigenous Peoples describes it as a cultural, artistic, and religious tradition, and traces the Christian indigenous form of it to Querétaro in 1531. INAD describes Otomi communities moving into the Querétaro area and coming into contact with Chichimeca groups. Otomi and Chichimeca, those are the names that actually sit at the root of this dance. And the word Chichimeca needs its own explanation because it was never one tribe. It was a broad label for a lot of different indigenous peoples living across the huge northern frontier, past the settled civilizations of central Mexico. Hunters, gatherers, semi-nomadic communities, people out in the semi-desert country of Querétaro and farther north. So it said more about where you lived and how you lived than about who you were. Now look at what they're actually wearing. The big feather headdresses are called penachos. Around the ankles, those are seed shell rattles, ayoyotes, and listen to them because that sound isn't decoration. Their bodies are part of the percussion. They're playing an instrument by walking. Then you've got hand rattles, drums, feather fans, embroidered clothing, beadwork, ceremonial objects that mean something specific inside each group. And the name concheros comes from an instrument too. Traditionally, these musicians played a small stringed instrument kind of in the mandolin family, and the body of it could be made from an armadillo shell. A concha. That's where the name comes from. A lot of them are made entirely out of wood now, but the name stuck. Here's what changes how you watch this though. For traditional concheros, dancing is prayer. These groups work like religious brotherhoods. They have their own hierarchy, their own obligations, their own permissions, and the dancing belongs to pilgrimages, vigils, Catholic feast days, visits to sanctuaries. The tourists filming this from the sidewalk, me included, are kind of beside the point. This would happen on an empty street. And the tradition has its own founding story. The Conchero account says that in 1531, Chichimeca warriors fought Otomi forces allied with the Spanish at a hill in Querétaro called the Cerro de San Grimal. And in the middle of the fighting, the sky goes dark, a cross appears, and with it, Santiago, St. James the Apostle. The Chichimecas accept Christianity, and they dance around the cross, and one phrase survives from that moment. Concheros still say it to each other, at vigils, at the start of a dance, as a greeting and as an answer, Él es Dios, He is God. Now, historically, you have to be careful here. Historians treat that appearance as a religious origin story, not as a documented event. That's the honest way to hold it. What is solid is that 16th century Querétaro really was a place where Otomi, Chichimeca, Spanish, and Christian traditions all ground up against each other and produced something new. And this dance is what that sounds like 400 years later, which is why you can see both worlds at the same time here. Feathers, drums, rattles, indigenous ceremonial movement, all of it walking toward a Catholic church. Mexico has been holding those two things in the same hand since the 1500s, and where they're going makes this even better. They're headed to the Santuario de la Virgen de Guadalupe at Calle Segunda and Niños Héroes here in Zona Centro. Mexico's official cultural information system lists it as Calle Segunda Benito Juarez, and this church has its own Tijuana story because this used to be the cathedral. Catholic worship on this site goes back to 1902 when it was a little wooden building, which is what most of early Tijuana was. It got rebuilt as the city grew. Big changes in the 1930s, and again from about 1949 to 1956. Then in 1964, the Diocese of Tijuana is created, and this parish gets elevated to cathedral. So for generations, when people here said La Cathedral, they meant this building. This was it. And then the city just outgrew it. Plans came together for a much bigger cathedral over in Zona Rio. And in 2022, the Archbishop confirmed the cathedral designation was going to the new one. So now this is the Santuario de la Virgen de Guadalupe. the Antigua Cathedral, the former cathedral, which is a strange thing for a building to be called, and also completely accurate. So you've got two histories landing on the same corner. One of them is Tijuana, a young border city that went from almost nothing to one of the biggest metro areas in Mexico inside a single lifetime. The other one goes back to central Mexico and the first decades after the conquest, and the thing connecting them is Guadalupe. Because she's not only a religious figure in Mexico, over 4 centuries, she became tied to Mexican national identity and indigenous identity in a way nothing else in the country touches. And here's a detail I love. The Guadalupe apparition story is set in December 1531. Same year, Conchero tradition puts sangremal, so these two traditions have been growing next to each other the entire time. That's why the dancers fit so naturally into Guadalupano celebrations. And they don't only come out once a year. Different groups dance at religious festivals, cultural events, pilgrimages, specific celebrations on their own calendar, and a lot of this gets passed down inside families. Parents teach kids, and those kids bring their own kids in later. Ina describes exactly that, generation to generation. But the biggest concentration of this in Mexico is around December 12th, the Feast of Our Lady of Guadalupe. That's when pilgrimages converge on churches and sanctuaries all over the country. And these aren't quick little performances either. Traditional Conchero practice includes processions, dancing, music, prayer, and velaciones, all-night vigils around an altar. In parts of Querétaro and Guanajuato, researchers have documented annual Conchero vigils tied to devotion to the Holy Cross, and you can see both Catholic and older indigenous cosmology preserved inside the same ritual. And among Danza Chichimeca communities in Querétaro, people still make pilgrimages up to sacred mountains, carrying religious images, dancing, playing music, asking for rain and protection, honoring their ancestors. Which brings me to the heat. Watch somebody hold the same step hour after hour on a street with no shade in August in Tijuana. That exhaustion is part of what's being offered. The body is the offering. You're not supposed to separate the music from the movement from the pilgrimage, or the pilgrimage from the prayer. It comes as one thing. Okay, last thing, and this is the part I said I'd come back to. What I'm filming today is not a frozen copy of 1531. The Danza Azteca and Danza Mexica movement has kept evolving, and a lot of it deliberately puts pre-Hispanic identity way out in front, much more than the older Catholic Conchero brotherhoods do. Recovering Mexica dance, music, symbolism, reinterpreting it. Researchers actually draw a line between those two things. That's why you'll hear all these names. Concheros, Chichimecas, Danza Azteca, Danza Mexica. Related, yes. Interchangeable, no. And the people inside the tradition know exactly where those lines are, even when the crowd watching doesn't. And you can't read somebody's ancestry off their clothing either. A dancer in this group could be from Baja California, Querétaro, Guanajuato, Mexico City, or a Mexican community in San Diego or LA. What they share is the tradition, and now they're at the old cathedral. Indigenous Mexico, colonial Mexico, Catholic Mexico, and modern border Mexico, all of it on the same 40 feet of asphalt, a couple kilometers from the border crossing, and the traffic behind them just has to wait. The rattles stop at the door, the drum keeps going.